Hi, my name is Tamta and welcome to My Kitchen, Her Story, where we celebrate all things female leadership. Here we aim to inspire, empower, and educate. Today's guest had a burning desire to build something that she cared about with people she respected and loved working with. She wanted to build something that's competitive and best in its own right while making a world a better place. So she decided to co-found an impact fund with two amazing women. Please meet the co-founder of Pact VC, Reem Mobassaleh Wyndham. Hi.
Hi, Tamta.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's great to see you this morning.
I know, nice and bright and early.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to dive into your background and all the things that you've done, and you still have so much yet to come.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, that's really exciting. But first of all, I would love to ask you, what are we cooking today and why?
So we're actually going to have, I'm going to show you how you make mirli. It is,
Mirli, okay.
Yeah, it's a very sort of traditional dish that's made once a woman has a baby.
Okay.
And you go over sort of in Middle Eastern culture, I'm Palestinian Lebanese, so in our part of the Arab world as well, we kind of serve this not just to the mother, but to guests when they come to visit the sort of new birth and the new baby.
Okay, so it's like a celebratory dish.
Definitely.
When you give birth. Right?
Definitely.
Have you have tickets? Have you made this, or somebody made it for you when you had a child?
So I have to admit, when I had my first son, Zaid, he's now almost 3, it was right in the middle of COVID when he was born.
Oh, wow.
So we never actually got to have an mberaka. We never actually got to have sort of the big celebration where people come over.
Right.
But I quickly learned how to make it.
Okay.
And I ordered all the ingredients off the internet because it was very hard to actually go find them in the shops.
Right.
And then I proceeded to make myself a full tray every other day.
Addiction is real.
Well, it's also this sort of myth, I don't know how real it is, that it helps with breast milk production.
Okay.
And all I knew was, instead of losing weight after I had a child, I ended up gaining weight. So lots of mirli with Zaid, less mirli I had with Lila. I kind of had lessons learned from the first child.
Okay. Amazing. I can't wait to try it. I've never tried it. So I think...
So this was my favorite dessert growing up.
Okay.
When I was 4 or 5 years old, I used to wait from that age on. Every time someone in our sort of family friend group had a baby, I would always go with my mother just in the hopes of getting a sort of a spoonful of this dessert. So
I
this
love
was
it.
a fan favorite.
I've never tried, so I'm really excited about that. So I think you can get started. I think we have some rice flour, some sugar.
It's actually one of the easiest recipes. There's about like 3 main ingredients in the pudding and then sort of 4 or 5 ingredients in the toppings.
Right,
so,
okay.
It's almost too easy to make. So
okay, let's go all the way back to Lebanon. You were born in Lebanon.
No, in fact, I was born in London.
You were?
I was.
Oh, I did not know that.
So it was kind of neither here nor there. During the Civil War in Lebanon in the 70s, my parents left, which was a harrowing story, and in its sort of own right, they couldn't find each other. They found each other in Damascus. My father was flying in from Egypt. The airport had closed. But then from there, the company my father was with had an office in London. So they just basically kind of left overnight and ended up in the UK. Okay. But by the time I was born, my parents or my family was living in the UAE. And they happened to be spending the summer in the UK. And the doctor that saw my mom told her she wasn't fit to fly.
Why was that?
She was carrying too low.
Oh, she was pregnant at that time.
She was pregnant.
Okay.
With me. And hence my October birthday. My mother actually believes that the doctor just wanted to keep her as a patient and there was nothing wrong with her. But anyway, happens.
Conspiracy theories.
Exactly. Welcome to the Arab world. We're full of them. Oh. So just to, as we kind of tell the story, let's kick this off. You kind of put the heat on low heat and you start off with sort of the 2 main ingredients. The rice flour, 1 cup of this, 1 cup of the sugar, the other dry ingredient, and then 3 teaspoons each of, I don't know if you can see this, but the anise seed, the caraway, and the cinnamon.
Yes, caraway is not a spice that I've ever actually even heard of.
Taste it, just put your finger in. I mean, you'll get a whole spoonful later, but it's a very
sweet?
It's a distinct, no, it's not sweet like cinnamon can be. It's a very distinctive flavor. But yeah, I didn't think you'd like it.
Thanks for this delicious taste, nice and early in the morning.
Look, once it's mixed with the cinnamon, the sugar, and the rest of it, you're going to love it.
Okay, so we are putting some flour.
It's almost 1 part, and I'm not really a measuring cup person, I think of more proportions. So it's 1 part rice flour, 1 part sugar, 8 parts water, and then 1 small spoon of each of those dry ingredients.
Okay, perfect.
So you mix in all of the dry ingredients together.
Great.
And then you add the water, and then you stir for about 20 minutes until it thickens, and basically you're done. You then put it in the fridge, and you let it chill there overnight, so it sets, and the consistency changes once you put it in the fridge.
Yeah.
And temperature matters a lot with cooking and texture. So it kind of gives it the right solidity.
Perfect.
And then you just top it with the beautiful ingredients.
Wonderful. Right. So while you're doing all of that, and you can tell me and boss me around and tell me what to do anytime.
Yeah.
Let's carry on that story. So your mother was pregnant with you when she was moving to the UK?
No, they
were already in the UK.
They had lived in the UK, and at that point, by the time I was born, they had moved to the UAE. So my father had gone and started a business there with some other partners. This is sort of late 70s and early 80s, and still spent summers in the UK because they sort of lived here for a year in between Lebanon and the Gulf, and that was sort of how my birth came about, or how my UK birth came about. But essentially, my family was living in the UAE, so I went there. Shortly after I was born, I think I was, at least in the 80s, one of the earliest travelers. I had my passport for years after that, like an infant photograph. And I have no idea how anyone ever let me pass a border because I was 5 and whatever. And I had the smashed face of like a 2-week-old in my passport. I have since put that passport to good use and probably more comfortable between places than any single one. I grew up in the UAE, I grew up in the US, Washington. After the Civil War ended, we used to spend summers every year in Lebanon. Before that, we're spending summers every year in Geneva, just trying to find a place where different friends, different family members could convene, right? When you have a war, people kind of end up all over the map, literally. So, there's for me kind of centers of gravity, places I call home.
Yeah.
I turn up and I have friends and I know my way around.
Yeah.
But very different to my husband, who, born and raised one place, London is his home. He's a Londoner.
Right. Do you remember the whole kind of that part of the life when the war was going on? And do you have any memory of it?
Sure. So I went a couple of times. So I actually went in sort of the height of the Civil War when I was 4 or 5 years old. With my mother to visit my grandfather because his health was failing and he'd never met me, and he really wanted to meet me before he died. And I'm not sure I would be able to do this with my kids because I don't think I have the nerves for it the way my mother did. But I remember flying in. It was at a time when some planes were being shot down or bombed out of the sky. There was a huge sense of relief. I remember on the plane when we landed, everyone clapped.
They still do. Every time I travel to, Eastern Europe, Middle East, those destinations, it's still there. They still clap every time we land.
It's gotten a bit better in Lebanon, but it used to be even for years after the Civil War because you didn't always know if you were going to make it. You didn't always know if you were going to land.
Yeah.
And then I do remember, a couple of times on that trip when we were there, there were bombings. You'd go hide in the archways. Yeah. You'd make sure that, you were in a secure part of the structure. I remember seeing bombs in the sky. So I didn't grow up in the war, but I do have memories of the war from visiting.
I can resonate with that because obviously growing up in Georgia, we had a lot of conflict in that part of the world with neighboring countries. And I have some recollection when I was very young where I can still remember tanks on the main street. Yeah. And, all the soldiers kind of on the standby that maybe that neighboring country is going to enter Georgia. Maybe they're going to bomb. What's going to happen? Yeah. And so it's a very surreal experience that a lot of people also would not necessarily resonate with unless you are from that kind of part of the world.
It is. And it's one of those things where, in the years afterwards, I did end up living in Lebanon, not just visiting for the summers. And whether it was civil unrest and therefore you had army or police, armed police sort of around everywhere, it just becomes commonplace and it kind of becomes part of the background or the scenery. Whereas I would have Western friends come and visit and, they would be visibly uncomfortable. And then I'd realize that it was because they're not used to having army out on the streets.
Yeah.
And then also in Lebanon, it's not just civil unrest. There are times when we also have issues with neighboring countries. I was in Lebanon in '06 when the '06 war, summer war with Israel happened. And that was devastating.
Yeah.
And, our building was shaking every night. As in, they were bombing the neighborhood right next door. Yeah. And we couldn't sleep because the foundations of our building were shaking so hard.
How do you think those experiences have shaped you into the person that you are now?
It's an interesting question because I am very grateful. I definitely was raised in a situation where I had relative security, safety, resources. My family was in a very different situation by the time I was born. But that reality of displacement, that reality of dispossession, strife, was very much one that framed my upbringing.
Right.
And I was raised aware of those stories and that history, and then also visited and so saw it firsthand, and came to realize that there was a responsibility on behalf of people that had resources, had exposure, had access, to figure out not only how to serve themselves, but how to serve others that don't necessarily have that voice or that access. And so that was always sort of a drive for me, was how do I use what I've been afforded and sort of the luck of my birth to have access to sort of level the playing field and help others.
Absolutely. Would you say that because of that realization and passion and the impact that you wanted to make, that because of that, you've shaped your career path the way you have?
That's an interesting question. I think that's always been a North Star for me. That's always been
back
sort
of
of
your mind.
A basic value that I think has framed all of the different decisions I've made professionally, personally in my life. And it's an interesting thing because if you look at my resume on paper, it probably doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, I went to Brown pre-med. From Abu Dhabi, I finished high school. I went back to the US, undergrad. I went to Brown. I'd actually applied for their 8-year medical school program. I was very convinced I wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be a doctor and then set up a clinic half the year and go treat people for free. And then I got to campus and then I got involved in sort of politics, essentially. I was very curious. I was coming from the Middle East. I started Arab-Jewish dialogue. In addition to all of my pre-med classes, I was doing a lot of the political science and then activism on campus, and then deep activism on campus, and then I created my own major. But by the time, conflict analysis and resolution with a focus on the Middle East. So really thinking about international relations through a positive-sum lens rather than a zero-sum sort of realpolitik lens.
And you did launch some initiatives where you really were pushing the government to do the right thing.
In Lebanon, yes. So interestingly, when I finished undergrad, I at that point knew I didn't want to pursue medicine. I also realized at that point I didn't want to pursue politics either. As much as I wanted to find a way to level the playing field, I realized through all of my work during that time that international organizations or NGOs wasn't the best fit for my skills. I mean, I had always grown up in a household of entrepreneurs. That's all my father ever did was work for himself in a community of entrepreneurs. It's very much sort of a Lebanese, Palestinian, Lebanese sort of trait. And I kind of was disaffected by large international organizations or think tanks. I felt would be more frustrating for me personally, and I wanted to look at sort of organizations that were more outcome focused, so private sector. So I actually left sort of that world behind, started a company in Beirut with 2 other partners, sort of more seasoned, more established, older partners, kind of a search fund style business. So really backing new companies, which I thought was sort of the engine of economic growth, and it is. I mean, it's not just my thought; it is sort of a well-established point of view. Is that you build from the grassroots, job creation, and the impact economically and socially is huge. It's probably one of the biggest ways to sort of drive stability. And I also like thinking through business. I love thinking about sort of what the new ideas could be, what does the future need, and how do we think about building a sort of future positive world from the ground up. So that was really exciting to me.
So is that what then pivoted you into the career that you are now? And what is it really, where did you start your really like corporate journey?
So I actually started my corporate journey right after I left undergrad. I went to New York. I worked at one of the largest advertising agencies in the world on some of their biggest global accounts. And it was kind of a segue from what I was doing in terms of activism into taking a large group of people, understanding how they think, and then kind of nudging them in another direction.
Yeah.
But I wasn't very satisfied selling anti-aging cream to aging women. That wasn't my shtick.
Okay.
So that's kind of when I went into the search fund. And that was very much sort of finance, entrepreneurial finance, sort of the startup world. When I set that up in Lebanon with my two partners. And then with everything that happened in Lebanon, I applied to business school.
Okay.
Earlier than I had planned. I'd wanted to do this longer. But I was kind of hedging myself. And then I got into Columbia. And so I took the admission. And after business school, I continued on that corporate journey, or that sort of, let's say, private sector journey. And I really cared, again, to find something that was sort of mission aligned. At that point, I had a few job offers on the table, but I was really excited about joining an organization that for the first time, I mean, not to date myself, but back in 2009, there weren't a lot of organizations that were talking about double bottom line return or financial returns plus impact or plus socioeconomic. And Mubadala was very squarely mandated by a dual bottom line return. And it was sort of investing in companies that were going to sort of be top performers, that were going to contribute as well to the economic growth of the country and the emirate, and do nation building. And it was a country and an emirate that is very dear to my heart. It's where I grew up, one of the places I grew up. And I was very excited about that journey.
That's amazing. So did you get started as an investor in Mubadala?
So I joined very early on, one of the first sort of half dozen employees in their advanced technology vertical. So in the space that was really focused at that point on semiconductor and foundries.
Okay.
And I joined actually on the asset management team just as we did a few $1 billion worth of M&A with a global footprint from Singapore all the way to San Francisco. So initially, while I thought I was moving back to Abu Dhabi, I actually ended up living sort of between tech ecosystems, between Asia and the US, which was super interesting. Again, you'll see the consistency. It's like a pudding. You kind of thicken it so that you get this kind of
it's like a custard, thickness, but a little bit thicker.
A little, exactly.
Right?
So I'm going to,
there
we go. Thank you. We pour it out.
Wonderful. Gives me like a porridge vibes.
It should be darker, so it shouldn't do that. Around the time that I was in Abu Dhabi, I really got into, given what I was doing with the search fund, I was always interested in sort of the startup space. Started doing angel investing.
Okay.
Backing
on the side.
On the side.
Right.
So there's no specialized capital. I mean, now it's there's like a very sizable and booming VC industry in the GCC. At that time, it wasn't just nascent; it was non-existent. There was no specialized capital for the space. But individuals were still writing angel checks. I was seeing deals, and I backed some fantastic founders. And I absolutely loved that early stage journey. I'd sort of at one point hoped I would be an operator. Later, I was one. I love that sort of time of a business, just as you're kind of getting traction. You're thinking about sort of future trends, and as an investor, being able to roll up your sleeves, be a sounding board on a whole range of things, from the product to the market to the person, the founder themselves.
Yeah.
The impact.
I actually because. There's one analogy that always strikes me when I talk to an investor, and for me to understand what kind of investor they are. And I always think about, are you the type of investor who crosses at the green light only, or actually is the riskier one and crosses at the red light? So where is your risk appetite? Therefore, how early you want to be involved in the journey? How early do you spot the opportunity and the future of this or that business? And what are the couple of things that you take into consideration when you're profiling that opportunity. Do you combine the data that's in front of you with the founder, with the gut maybe? What is that kind of the secret sauce of yours that made you successfully identify opportunities and then invest in them?
So on the red light, green light, I'm very much a cross on yellow kind of girl.
Yeah.
So I like to negotiate the edge. I think that that's where there's a lot of value. I think looking at the edge where things might be overlooked, but you can spot something there that others might not see, whether it's something in the founder, something in the problem they're trying to solve. As I said, I like negotiating. So I like negotiating the edge of like what is super safe, but still therefore where the huge opportunity might lie.
Right.
And within that, at the stage that I invest in, it is very much sort of around the founder and around sort of the qualities of the founder and the founding team. And similar to what I was looking for in my own founders, my own co-founders with Pact, you really want to make sure that you have cohesion, you have complementariness, you share values, and you share vision.
Yeah, and I think that's when I first time met you girls, one of my biggest fascination and admiration for the team was that you're all so different. I mean, not only you come from different parts of the world, but you are also from various backgrounds that was almost like in the perfect way complementing each other and filling each other's gaps.
It's so funny you say that because it's not just like a geographic diversity that we have. I'm from the Middle East, Minik is originally from Turkey, Tong is originally from China.
Yeah.
And you throw in Europe, you throw in the US, kind of in that sort of breadth that we cover. Professionally, we have a completely different range of backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. But also personality-wise too, right?
If you met us at the same party, you'd be like, I wouldn't really peg you guys as best friends. But it's interesting because I think our friendship grew out of the respect that we had for one another because we've been working together for 5 or 6 years before we decided to launch Pact. So I think the deep friendship we have now is from the years of being in the trenches that really, like the kernel of that was the respect that we had for the skills and insight and capabilities that we all sort of had collectively.
Yeah, but also despite of all of these various backgrounds and you're so complementary to each other, but the one thing that you all have in common is that passion for impact.
Yes, and I think the other thing that we all have in common, even like more foundationally than that, is I think we're all a little bit masochistic. As in, I don't know how else to put this, but we are singularly focused, we're solutions focused, and there was never a point in our sort of entrepreneurial journey together where it was like, oh, hey, this isn't going to work out. What's my out? What's my alternative? It was, this is going to work.
There is no plan B.
There's no plan B.
That's it. This is what we're doing.
And when I say masochistic, it was COVID. Nothing was happening in the market. Well, there was a big disruption in the market. And
a lot of uncertainty.
We had just started, so much uncertainty.
We had babies in the plane.
I was about to say, we had just started
difficult.
talking about maybe starting a fund. I got pregnant. I apologized. I was like, guys, I'm so sorry. I know this wasn't part of the plan. And then 6 months, they're like, yeah, we'll make it work. Don't worry. But I could tell, like, did they really want to make it work? I was like, shit, did I mess up?
And I think a lot of women would resonate with you with that, at that time, apologetic almost attitude where we have nothing to be apologetic
100%.
about.
Well, it's not just apologetic because I don't think there have been a lot of models. So when I said I joined Mubadala, at that point, there weren't a lot of models that were looking for both financial returns and socioeconomic returns or impact returns. But now, the more you see it, the more you realize it's possible, and now it's becoming commonplace, I hope.
Yeah.
And similarly, I grew up in a world where, you either pursue your career or you have a family, or like you kind of take some cheeky time out, have a family, and then you throw yourself back into work, and you don't necessarily have that balance, or a world where you are enabled structurally to do both. And what I was about to say was both Tong and Monique, 6 months after I got pregnant, came to all of us with the news, and they shared that they were also pregnant, and they had their kids within 4 days of each other. So,
and that is wild journey, but also wildly inspiring because, I mean, I already knew you guys when you were then pregnant on your second.
Yeah.
and
You were almost my doula on my second.
Oh my God, guys, we had the funniest story. We were going outside of London for a meeting.
Yeah.
Reem is super heavily pregnant. I mean,
as in I was due like 10 days later.
I think it was even less.
Yeah.
And so we have written out and researched what are the closest hospitals in case the labor starts.
I mean, we were maybe 4 or 5 hours away from London. We're in the north of the country.
Yeah. I had her husband's phone number. I had her doctor's phone number. So I was on a standby, and secretly I was very excited. This is going to be fun. This is going to be a story to tell.
Well, this makes this business trip a little bit spicier if my daughter decided to join us on the return home.
Yeah, she let me down. She did not. But I think that's a very also relatable story for a lot of women, and almost a dilemma for a lot of women to think, well, I'm starting a business. Is this the right time? What will potential investors say?
Yep.
How would they look at me when they see me heavily pregnant?
I think there are two ways to think about it.
How was your journey?
Yeah.
Like, did you have that anxiety that...
Of course.
Well, I'm going
I mean,
in.
I probably still have that anxiety, not to the same degree and not in the same way, but that's always in the back of your mind when you have kind of big responsibilities like that at the same time. But the way I think we broke it down, and I started to say, like, one thing that's great about us isn't just we care about impact, it's also that like the way we work, our attitude is we share that value of being solutions focused. And I think we kind of broke it down in kind of two ways. Operationally, how do we make this work? And then optically, you know, is the market ready for this, and how do we address perhaps biases in the room, especially as you mentioned with investors.
Right.
Operationally, you have to make sure that whoever you're partnering with is on board and understands that when you have a baby, at least for a while, and always to some degree, world will be baby-centric, right? So...
what do you mean by that?
You know, I didn't really stop
Your
working.
world will be baby-centric?
For example, I didn't really stop working when I had, I mean, you saw it with Leela. I didn't really stop working, but I did have to adjust my responsibilities. So I focused on the things that were sort of going to drive the most value given what I was doing in the organization, but I was still breastfeeding. Yeah. So when you're breastfeeding, you know, you're on a rhythm. I was on a 3-hour rhythm, then a 4-hour
You're on her
rhythm.
schedule.
It's baby-centric.
Right.
So you can't decide, you know, I'm going to have a meeting and baby will fit around meeting. No, I have this routine with the baby, and my meetings, my commitments will fit around that.
Right.
And that's not working less or working with less dedication. It's about being creative and accommodating to allow for schedules and routines to evolve the way they need to, and really trusting that, you know, if I was in an all-male environment, I can anticipate that even if I had supportive colleagues, I might have felt uncomfortable worrying about their judgment. But I was sort of lucky enough and blessed to have the two partners that I did, not only because they're women, but because we were all going through that experience for the first time together, having our first kids, that we, from the get-go, had to build an organization that was both flexible but high performance. And so there wasn't a trade-off.
And that probably also has given you the backing, the confidence that from your partner that infused that your confidence into and translated it into the meetings when you were going in with the investors. Because I meet a lot of women who have not so great experiences when, you know, their potential investors...
With their partners or within...
No, within external world. When they're especially fundraising, raising a business, and there is a lot of experience of a judgment, quite silent bias, and all of that. And I think you had that confidence kind of infused and injected in you by your partners and your family to an extent that you were very unapologetic about your journey.
Well, it was very clear.
As you should be, by the way.
And it's one of those things where we were unapologetic, but I also have to say that that strength came not just from the three of us and the sort of shared journey we were on becoming mothers, raising a family while raising a fund. It was also and sort of huge, you know, thanks to our early backers, our early LPs that knew us and were like, you know what? We've, you know, our anchor investor has been a great partner. It was someone that we had worked with for years before starting the fund. Tong had one of my partners, Tong, had a strong relationship with them. They got to know the three of us. They backed us. And, it didn't sort of miss a beat when we got pregnant because they knew our dedication, they knew our commitment, they knew our passion for what we were building.
But also a lot of it is planning.
In what sense?
In what sense that I know I'm going to be reshifting my focus and priority. Who's going to fill that gap? And the organization still needs to run to make it.
It's not just planning, it's actual organizational maturity.
Right.
And planning is, I think, one thread of that. It's planning, it's the systems that you use, being consistent with them so that things are transparent. And that you can have more of a platform approach where everything you're working on, everything everyone's working on is visible, anyone can pick up, anyone can see what's going on. I think that's core to not just our situation, but any kind of remote working environment. And then also this concept, I think, that we've become increasingly more adept at, which is this concept of return on time invested. So if you're thinking about your time and you're thinking about that as your scarcest resource, how do you make sure that you're maximizing the value of what's coming out of that time? And so using those sort of different systems is a constant periodic reprioritization of what's really going to move the needle for us.
Right.
And I think that kind of, or that level of organizational maturity, that extreme focus on what's going to drive value for our business, for our portfolio, for our LPs, I think was accelerated by the fact that, we were mothers. When you have a constraint, you either rise to it and figure out how to crack it, find a solution, or it kind of inundates you and it kind of gets the better of you. And so I think that organizational maturity, planning is part of it, the return on time invested is part of it, protocol is part of it.
I think you're one of the most organized early stage even organizations that I've worked with. I mean, I walked into the first meeting and the girls were like, pull up this technology platform, pull up that. Like, you have a question around that? Yes, we got that sorted. And I was like, I mean, I don't know if you need me, guys. Like you were.
We love you, Tamta. We'll always need you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. But I would love for you actually to tell us a little bit more about ABCs.
Okay.
But I want to take out our snacky snack.
The reason why we're here today.
Try that, exactly. Okay. So this is our little cheat version. Well, we didn't cheat it. We cooked it. I mean, she cooked it
twice. It's the accelerated version. So I made this at home and let it set overnight so that you guys can see. Okay, you can't tilt too much because it'll slide out of the bowl. So perfect. This is mirli when it's set. It's kind of this consistency. As you say, it looks like a bit of a custard. Yeah. Slightly different color, a bit browner because of the cinnamon.
Definitely doesn't look like a porridge anymore.
No. But then what you do, and I'll kind of let you do yours. I'll show you how I do mine. Yeah. You do a mix of all of the nuts.
Okay. And we just sprinkle it on top?
You mix it up and then you put that at the very end.
Okay, perfect. I'll just follow your lead.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about your ABCs because I think it's such a differentiator and such a core of what your organization is based on.
For us, as you mentioned earlier, we all, for various reasons, I told you a bit of my background, my story, and what sort of built my values. Tong and Monique also arrived to kind of the same place through their own experiences, that there's really a responsibility, not just on behalf of kind of the early stage founder, but the early stage investor, to understand sort of what the impact is at scale of the business, not just on the users, but on stakeholders.
Right.
And baking that really into the conversation from the early days. And our investment themes, as you mentioned, ABCs, super catchy, kind of the foundations. It really represents access, betterment, and climate.
Okay. So that is the impact areas that you're working with.
So they're not just impact areas, they're also where we see sort of longer term secular demand from the market coming. Kind of want to do it a bit lower, but yeah. Yes. So you see longer term secular demand coming. Why? Because you have shifts in values-based consumption, values-based work, living, and then also shifts in regulation that are driving sort of large and growing markets, market demands for those three themes.
Right.
And so as a result, that's kind of, we take a thematic approach. Over time, the different sectors that serve those themes will sort of evolve. But under access, at the moment, we see a lot of financial inclusion, economic participation. So that's a lot of inclusive finance, SME SaaS services, betterment, a sort of future of work, automation, healthcare, wellness, and then under climate and sustainability.
Amazing.
But within that, we're looking at really highly commercial impact. Okay. So to build a better future, there's a role for a whole host of different types of organizations and actors from government, international organizations, NGOs, but there's also a role for sort of the private sector. And within VC, there's also a role to back sort of highly scalable, venture-backable businesses that are also building a future positive world. And that's really where we play. Yes, and so that framework of the ABCs, we not only use as an investment filter, we also use it to set impact targets. And we're very consciously work with the founders together to set impact targets that are actually sort of contributing to commercial value and growth of the business. So rather than being something that kind of sits sort of alongside and as a distracting sort of additional target, it very much are targets that are kind of part and parcel of healthy growth for the business.
Amazing. Guys, this is so cute. No, don't slide. Okay.
So you can imagine these in little bowls all
These
set out.
are so cute. I love it.
When a little baby arrives, it's actually very pretty.
Let's have a taste while...
So you tell me first.
Yes.
Please, tell the chef.
How is it?
Yes, thumbs up, thumbs down.
First bite, best bite. Oh, wow.
You see? The caraway is kind of blended in. You don't feel that, it doesn't sort of stick out as much. It's an interesting collection of spices.
I can definitely taste starness. Yum.
Exactly right.
It's such a blend of spices and the crunch from the nuts. It's just adds the texture to it. It's delicious.
It's actually a really wholesome dish. It's like high energy, lots of nutrition. It's very nutritional. Yeah. So
delicious.
It's kind of a very wholesome dish.
I love
for
it.
new mothers
I'm gonna take this and snack on it the whole day.
You saw how easy it was to make.
So tell me, back to the advice. What is the advice you would give a founder who is early on his or her journey? What is it? What are the 2-3 things that they need to take into consideration before they're speaking to investors, or even when they're speaking to investors?
I think before you even think about your sort of investor journey or your journey getting fundraising, think about your journey as an entrepreneur. I think team is incredibly important. I think being an entrepreneur is one of the most difficult jobs out there, and I have so much respect for the founders we meet, whether we back them or not. It is one of the most difficult things anyone can do, and I've tried it myself.
Yeah.
And when you're in the trenches, you want to make sure that you're in the trenches with people that you can work with, that you can trust, that you understand how you complement each other. So very much kind of the entrepreneurial journey I had with Pact and sort of the value that I have in my team, I think you need to make sure you have that early on when you're starting your own business sort of as an operator.
So pick your team and co-founders, if you have any, carefully and thoughtfully.
100%. And then think both long-term and short-term. And this is when you start thinking about sort of not just sort of from the entrepreneurial journey as sort of a product maker and serving your user, but also when you're thinking about your audience of investors. This is going to be equally as important, setting your own vision, as well as communicating the future value to an investor. And you don't need investors necessarily in the early days. Bootstrap as much as you can, but when you do feel that time is right and you do want to seek external funding, have that sort of vision clear in your mind, because oftentimes you come across founders and they're really looking kind of immediate. That's important. You need to know what your wedge is. You need to know how you're going to get traction, get off the ground. But you also need to know what you're building for. What is the market going to look like? How is it shifting over time? And how are you going to come up to disrupt it, to serve it?
Okay.
And kind of link those two.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So we have choose your team and co-founders carefully, and also define the culture that you have within that team.
Very much so.
And have a plan for short as well as the long term, and the vision for it, whether it's a product or service that you're creating, and how you see that grow and scale.
Yep.
Right.
I think scaling your unit economics over time is incredibly important. So it's not just sort of a top level vision exercise, it's thinking from the ground up. Obviously that will change over time, but just thinking in a more pragmatic level.
Absolutely.
What does it take to serve this market?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
It was such a pleasure spending this morning with you.
I loved it. And thank you for all the delicious snacks that you made for us. I have a little something for you just to say thank you
you're
for
so
being
sweet.
here.
Oh, a woman can never say no to flowers. That's gorgeous.
Exactly. I think we have
thank you.
beautiful
That's so sweet.
bouquet of pink roses from Flower Box. And they really wanted to brighten up your day.
They're
and,
gorgeous, really. They look
and-
so nice in the living room.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.